Leaders, good afternoon. Welcome to the show. I am super excited to be with you guys today. On with us today is a true American hero. George Randle is the VP and head of global talent acquisition at Forcepoint. He's also the strategic advisor at EF Overwatch. Forcepoint is a subsidiary of Raytheon that concentrates on cybersecurity and data protection. EF Overwatch is an executive professional search firm that takes a unique, disciplined approach to sourcing, selecting, and advising organizations on their complete talent pipeline. Alongside of that, George is a retired Army officer with 20 plus years of experience. He's got deployments to Africa, Central America, Guantanamo Bay. He served as platoon leader and XO for the largest company in Berlin. He was a company commander at Fort Hood in Texas, along with his co-author Mike Sorelli, which we will have on the show coming up soon. These guys literally wrote the book on our topic of discussion for today. The book is called The Talent War: How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. It's coming out November 10th. I'm excited because I've already got my pre-order on Amazon. The link will be in the description below. I'm excited to get my hands on the book. I'm excited to talk to you today, George. Thank you for joining us. Most of all, thank you for serving our great nation. Hey, George, appreciate you joining us.
Hey, thanks, brother. I'm glad you invited me. Hopefully, I do well for you.
This is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. I've got a soft spot for talent acquisition because when I do my consulting, when I go into clients, I tell the executives that the quickest and best way to have an impact on organizational performance is by putting the right people in the right seats.
Yep.
Tell me about your approach to talent acquisition and managing the entire talent pipeline.
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, I actually fell into talent acquisition accidentally. I was in consulting and I had a family circumstance, had to get out of DC and move back to Texas. And I got into, HR, resource management, talent acquisition, but, I've spent, all this time in it. The one thing, when I first got into it, it was nothing but butts and seats. It was the mechanics. It was almost, back then, well pre-Amazon days, it was like people would call you up and say, hey, I need something, and I'm going to list out the specifications, somewhat like ordering a laptop nowadays. Here's all the specifications that I want it to have. Now go find it and go get it. And to your point about getting the right people in the right roles, the thing that we've noticed we wrote about in the book was that nobody takes the time to determine what success in that role looks like.
Right.
And so it's one of the things that we started with is that you don't just have an opening. You might, but if you haven't determined what success is, then everything else that you do after that is going to be strictly on objective requirements. How many years of experience? Do they program in this language? Did they work for this competitor? So, my approach has always been, okay, before we go nuts here, what's success?
Right.
What attributes determine success in this role? Then we go to the rest of the objective stuff. And that sometimes that might slow things down a little bit, but I think, given that your greatest asset is your people, if you get that piece right, you're on your way.
Yeah, the issue of identifying these subjective qualities and identifying the objective standards, both of this is a balance, right? The subjective qualities, that's an issue of human judgment. The objective qualities we can test for. Do they have X number of years of experience coding in that language? Whatever. That's either yes or no. It's a binary. How do you train everyone inside of the talent acquisition team to identify these subjective traits?
Well, we're still, when I walked into my current company, and my CEO knows it, so I'm okay to say it. It was a dumpster fire when I walked in 2 years ago. We were order takers. And it wasn't for lack of talent on the team. As you've probably seen, the misalignment, the ownership of positions and businesses are being embedded in the business. We had to go fix that. So we're now starting to teach how to assess the 9 attributes that we talk in the book, and I won't give away all 9, but obviously there's integrity in there, there's drive, there's team ability, effective intelligence, emotional intelligence, the 9 attributes that we kind of distilled from all of the special operations branches.
Right.
But we start with what kind of questions will elicit those characteristics, those behaviors. Meaning, we don't list standard questions, but we say, okay, if these are your 3 critical character attributes, then what questions are going to elicit responses that you can evaluate? And so we try to train the team on the definition of those traits, how they would apply in business, how they might apply to our company. And then it's on to the hard part. And the hard part is, our talent acquisition consultants will screen for it. But then how do you train your hiring managers and your interview panels, to do the very same thing and to validate that? And also to make sure that maybe one group is screening for, emotional or affective intelligence. One is screening for drive, and not everybody's asking the same set of questions 6, 7 times as the candidate comes. I mean, you and I both been through that, where we went to 7 different people and we basically gave the same answer to a different version of the same question all the way through the process. So train your talent acquisition team on what they're looking for with the attributes, and then try to start exporting that business by business. And one of the things that Mike and I talked about, it's really critical when you're talking to your hiring managers that for departments that they have a hiring team. And you can do that in a number of ways, but the simple concept for time is that one of the critical things, and I think it's the holy grail in talent acquisition, is where's the feedback loop? How did those people perform 6 months after you brought them in the company? Right. Were you really bringing in the right talent? Were you doing things the right way, that you got the right talent in the right roles?
Right.
So the problem is if you keep rotating out your hiring teams, or, every time you bring in a candidate to the engineering department, the product, customer success, or sales, if it's different people, you can't measure those responses with any reliability. So to the degree that you can standardize the team, then you can start evaluating with the feedback loop that says, hey, we put 20 people through this process. 6 months down the road, out of these 20, 18 are hammering it, 2 we missed. Okay, why did we miss? How do we tighten that shot group up a little bit more?
So this tells me that you have to prioritize retention and development of your TA team first.
Yes. I've had 0 attrition in 2 years.
Fantastic. You mentioned something earlier that got me very curious. Your new role, you stepped in there with your new relationship with his new CEO, and you had some very frank conversations. Here's what I've noticed. Some CEOs and some organizations, at best, they have a VP of HR. Why do you think those organizations do not have a CHRO role?
Yeah, Mike and I and Dr. Cotton, we kind of dug into that, and I think it's an old way of thinking.
Yeah.
And that old way of thinking is that our product, our service, they still operate under the revenue cures all. How are we selling to the clients? How are we delivering to the clients? How are we developing our product? And it's like they're up at this high level and they're not thinking, well, who's doing the service? Who's doing the building of the product? Who's doing the selling? It's a human being.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, there's some companies, and we are very careful not to broad brush, the majority of companies do not treat their human capital as critical as they do their financial capital.
Right.
And so the companies that are thinking that HR is compliance or administrative, hey, they're there to do payroll, comp and benefits, the performance management system, the leave, the sick leave,
right,
run all of those things. They're still in that mindset that it's an administrative function.
HR just does paperwork.
Exactly. So you have those leaders that think like that, and then you combine them sometimes with HR leaders who don't know how to take business problems and apply talent solutions to them. So they don't know how to cross the bridge of being operational and administrative to the strategic side of the equation. So you have, as Jocko Willink, we were just on Jocko's podcast, if you know who Jocko is, every problem is a leadership problem.
Yep.
It isn't solved by PowerPoint. It isn't solved by a new program. It isn't solved by anything other than leadership. And so you have to be coming from both directions. Your CEOs have to be demanding that their CHRO, there is the role, because You're right. Some companies don't have them. and that they're strategic and they're locked at the hip. And you have to have the heads of HR who recognize their strategic value to the company and how it solves all the business problems from a human perspective. You have to have two ends of the equation. So it's not just CEO's fault. It's not just HR's fault. You know, they both have to be recognizing the value of treating your human capital as important as you should.
So pretend we are now at a conference, SHRM or PIRA, whatever it is, and you're speaking to a group of HR professionals, directors, senior directors, maybe even VPs. Give some advice to this group of individuals on how they can raise their strategic value and strategic partnership to the C-suite. What do they need to do to get a seat at that table?
Well, it's wonderful that you use those terms, John, seriously, because one of the quotes in the book, and I've known it for I don't know how many years, a mentor, a coach, and an example for me is Tracy Keough. She was the CHRO, still is, of HP. And an executive, it's in the book, an executive said, "Hey, Tracy, it's great we have HR at the table." And she didn't miss a beat, and she said, "HR is the table." And if you think about that, it's very profound in that everything we do revolves around people. So the first thing that I would advise that group is, number one, is get your mind right.
Yep.
We are the table. Everything that goes on in a company, regardless of your industry, regardless of whether it's a service, it's a product, it does not matter. Every solution is a people solution, and that's where it starts. So your mindset's got to get right. Second of all, you have to adopt the business problems as your own.
Extreme ownership.
Extreme ownership, exactly. Meaning, if the business has a problem, you're the solution. You have to take ownership of the human side of that equation and provide them a solution. If I'm a sales leader and I'm thinking that HR is administrative, but HR comes to the table with a strategic solution of how to bring the performance up by bringing in better talent, realigning talent, and you're making that sales leader's problems your own,
right?
Then you're going to be in a position to show your strategic value. And I would tell you, there's not a chief product officer, there's not a chief revenue officer, there's not any of the C-suite that when you take things off their plate and provide them solutions and free up their world to not deal with the human issues, and you're the subject matter expert. I mean, when you've taken something, when you've done consulting, when you take something off somebody's plate, it's like, wow, and they did it well. All right, I'm gonna give this over to them. HR has to have that same mindset.
Right. When I step into a client situation and we've delivered a solution that frees up bandwidth for these executives, the pitch, the value proposition is now that you've got more time on your hands, it's not just an issue of money and resources, because sometimes it requires the reallocation of those resources over to the people side, over to the solution that we're talking about. It's the freeing up of the mental bandwidth, the most valuable asset in the executive suite, for them to go solve problems that only they can solve.
Yeah, bingo. It's like, I want my chief revenue officer and my theater leads running sales. I want them out with the customer. I want my chief product officer and lead engineers and all of my architects focused on engineering on the product.
Yeah.
I don't want them focused on the people issues other than the leadership, coaching, mentorship, the constant feedback, and making those people better. But people solutions, whether that's structural, whether that's individual, whether that's communication, you know, I hate to say it, and it's a little bit flippant, but Mike and I are very straightforward and to the point. You can teach anybody to do the paperwork of admin. You can teach a monkey to do it if you had enough bananas. It's not a lot to do. That's not the value. And many HR people reduce themselves.
Yeah.
They contract. And there's this huge opportunity out there to show how valuable you can be. But you want your engineers doing engineering. You want your sales doing sales. You want your legal people doing legal. You don't want them doing, they're doing contracts. They're doing intellectual property work. They're protecting your brand. You want your marketing people out there, getting that brand out there. The people issues, bringing in that talent, HR's got to lead the way.
I've seen this trend happening in the enterprise world. And as a matter of fact, one of my good friends who works for a Big Four accounting firm, I'm not going to name the name, they're switching to this particular HR model, and that is rolling into a service center model. Have you seen this?
Yeah, I have.
What's your thought on that?
So there's the good and bad, not knowing the details of it. There are efficiencies that you're going to gain by centralizing the repetitive functions.
Right.
You know, your payroll. And I think that moving to self-service and automating most of that is a good thing for HR because it frees you up to play that strategic role.
Yes.
Meaning you centralize that stuff. Now, if you're trying to put HR in a box to do only that,
yes,
then yeah, you're missing out something. I mean, when I was in the military, when Mike was in the military, we look at it this way, and we said this on Jocko's podcast, because CHROs are generally paid 1/3 of their C-suite counterparts.
That's bananas to me. That's bananas.
It's nuts. And so what we did is we equate that to the special operations. You know, you have point men, you have machine gunners, you have breachers, you have medics. Think for 1 second if you were a SEAL platoon, or you're one of the companies that I led and I paid my medics less than I paid my shooters. Well, how would that work out for me? So if you're in a company and you're paying a function less than what you pay, now don't get me wrong, salespeople are incentivized, and engineers. I mean, I understand market. I'm not saying that, but when you pay your leadership of a particular function less, you're saying its level of importance.
Right.
It drives me nuts. So it's okay to your original question, to centralize and automate those things that you can, and gain all of those efficiencies, so you can put the money back into the parts of human resources and talent acquisition that count. And that's the strategic, parts of it. That's the talent branding. That's the performance management, the leadership coaching, the leadership development, the things that make your company and give your company the biggest competitive advantage possible.
Absolutely. Leadership. Let's talk about that for a second, because you talked about the bottom up and the top down approach. Change has to come from both sides. So let's talk about leaders for a second. Now, regardless of vertical function or domain of expertise, you, George, make hiring decisions, or at least you set policies for your TA team to go out and look for XYZ, whether that's at EF Overwatch or at Forcepoint. What are you looking for in executives that you hire?
Well, it depends upon the role. It does, we put up the 9 attributes.
Yep.
And, and even the special operations community is not looking for all 9. MARSOC, they're looking for, 5. You're only going to hit bullseyes on so many of the 9. But I'm looking for intelligence, effective intelligence, and effective intelligence is really, really big, meaning people that can lead in a volatile, what we call a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous environment. People that can pick up the cues of all different things and put it into a coherent picture of, that kind of intelligence. I'm looking for drive, absolute drive. I'm looking for resiliency in executives, because if you're an executive and everything's going right, then you're probably not working hard enough, or your company's not challenged enough.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for a phrase that we coined called team ability.
Tell me more about that.
So, it doesn't matter whether you're a leader or follower. And Mike and I kind of do this, and we did this right in a book called The Best Idea Wins. So even if you're the leader or the executive, you're a member of a team in a big sense, in your own individual organizational structure. So you have to have the ability to play in a team environment. And just because you're in charge doesn't mean you have the best ideas.
Right.
It means, you're providing the leadership, the vision, and the decision making, but you have to check your ego. You have to be, hey, when I need to be a follower, I need to be a follower. Hey, my architect over here has got the best idea. I need to put my leadership and resources behind that. And so that team ability is somebody that can check their ego, get into that team ability or team player role, step out of the pure leadership, decision-making, ego-based role that most people think that that is, and support the team. And additionally, how does that executive, if you're sales, then you're counting on your product, you're counting on your customer support, you're counting on your accounts payable. You're still in a bigger ecosystem. So what is your ability to play in the team? And we pick on salespeople a lot because you get these sales leaders and they think everything's in support of them.
Right.
Typically. And it's very, very common. And there's a certain amount of ego you want in your salespeople. But they're part of a larger environment, meaning if that's the greatest salesperson in the world, but your accounts payable or your customer support, your follow-up service, your delivery of product isn't good, it doesn't matter how good you are, you all lose.
Right.
The team ability is huge with executives. Integrity, team ability, drive, resiliency, and effective intelligence are generally those things I have to see every time.
A sales guy came up to me and he said, if it weren't for us, if we didn't do what we did, nobody would get paid. And I said, all right, man, but if we didn't do what we did, nobody would get paid again.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And I remember I was in this specialized unit, and so they had all smaller support components with it. And, we actually put in the book, and we made it a point to call that out, is when we talk about A players and what makes special operations so special, we were very purposeful in saying that you need A players in all the roles, not just special operations, but you need them in the support elements, the service support elements, because special operations doesn't do things in a vacuum. They don't do things. The logistics, the pilots, the people that get them to different places, the medics that support them, the logisticians that support them, the boat drivers, the helo and fixed wing pilots. It's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so to your point, and I remember Commo guys, is that we had a Commo platoon and their motto was, you could talk about us all you want, but you can't talk without us. So all of your combat arms guys that think they're so hot say, okay, try doing that without communication.
Good luck.
And it really drives home the point that all the elements of a company are critical. And so the team ability of a key leader or executive really will drive forward that company further and faster the higher degree of team ability they have to realize, hey, payroll is important, accounts payable, customer support, all of those, I need to make sure that ecosystem is working right.
I couldn't agree with you more, but therein lies another problem. You're a TA guy. I'm an OD guy. Let me try to pull you into my world a little bit. When I'm trying to redesign a new structure and redesign decision-making policies and protocols, the challenge that I come up with is how do I predetermine parameters and criteria for when decision-making fluidity is necessary and when centralized decision-making is necessary. Both have their time and place.
Yeah.
But when is the right time, based on your opinion, for somebody to say the best idea wins and let's just figure out where this marketplace of idea is taking us? And then there are times when you have to say, no, this is the way we're going. Let's take the hill.
Well, ultimately, it's the leader's job to decide. And we didn't go down a whole lot in the book about that. But when you combine the best idea wins with checking your ego and ownership, then decisions, whether they're centralized or decentralized, tend to happen much, much quicker.
Right.
What we tried to express in the book was, in every way, shape, or form, how do you take ego out of it? Now, there's the good ego, meaning I can be a better version of myself. My team can be better. That competitive side that, hey, we can drive and get better.
Necessary, yep.
But the ego for the individual, where I get credit, that's the bad part. So if we can take out ego, and we stress this, that the best leaders are humble, that humility. Matter of fact, the Army, I can't remember how many years the Army's been around before they changed their leadership manual and put humility in as one of the top criteria. So I'm certainly not the expert to say, from an OD perspective, where centralized or decentralized decision-making is best. But I know in the book that if we get the right leaders in place in any organization, whether it's more centralized, whether it's matrix, decentralized, however you want to cut it up, if they have the humility, they have the team ability, and they operate with the best idea wins, whichever structure serves that organization best, it will work at its optimum level with those three factors.
Let's talk about humility for a second.
Yeah.
The idea of humility, I think, is misunderstood.
Yeah.
A lot of people see it as meek and weak. Tell me how.
Actually, it's the strongest attribute outside of integrity. It's the strongest attribute you should be showing, and it goes at the heart of best idea wins. And as an example, so Mike and I are working together. Mike is a SEAL, and he has, without disclosing what we can't disclose, he's worked in the most elite units of the SEAL, special warfare.
Yep.
Both on the Army, he's JSOC side, and then I'm Army. So you're putting an Army guy, an Army paratrooper, and a Navy SEAL together. There's two A players with generally a lot of confidence and a fair amount of ego in what we can do. But when we laid humility on top of it, meaning we don't care about anything other than mission accomplishment, it's discipline to keep your ego in check.
Yep.
It shows how strong you are. It shows Mike how strong I am to say, you know what, Mike, I like the way you put that in the book. I like the way you wrote that. I like the way you approach it. I'm going to back that up. Let's go with it.
Right.
The reverse of that would be, I want to take control of what he's doing and I want my idea to win. There's nothing weak about me saying that's the best thing to do. It's demonstrating my strength, it's demonstrating my discipline, and it's demonstrating that I have the character attributes to recognize what's good and support it, full-throated.
What happens when you both think your ideas are great? Who adjudicates?
The two of us.
With the two of you, but also in an executive setting.
We knock it back, when you get two egos that are clashing in executive, really what you, hopefully, if they both come from a place of humility, they're picking apart their own idea. And, they both make the case ultimately, if it's in a sales department, the sales leader's got to run with it because they actually own the final decision, the final delivery. Generally, you're going to default to whose department or whose segment or who owns that particular project. But in an ideal world, and I know even Mike and I, if we got to a point where we both thought we both had the best thing, I'm looking, okay, is this this is an individual battle? Meaning, do I need to win this battle? Mike's thinking the same thing. Do I need to win this individual battle, or is it better to, hey, you know what? I'm going to give George what he wants because I'm going to take off over here. Everything in life is generally a trade-off.
Right.
And the humility helps you kind of get through those moments.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's, we've got a couple minutes left here, so I want to switch gears to something broader in scope. Yeah. I want to talk about employer branding. Okay. What's your approach on designing great employer branding? Whether that's at Forcepoint or at EF Overwatch, helping other organizations do this? And how do you project that image into the labor market?
Well, I think no matter what you do on digital, social, or other branding, whatever goes out into the market, the first thing that's always out in the market are your people. So your leadership has to create a culture that values those 9 attributes: the integrity, the team ability, the humility, drive, resiliency, effective intelligence. If they're valuing that, because the first thing about your talent brand is that everybody's a talent scout and everybody's a representative of your product, of what your company does. So you've got to get your culture right. You've got to get your leadership, excuse me, a little bug in here. You've got to get your leadership right. You've got to get your culture right, and you've got to get your people understanding that leadership and those traits are the most important things in this company.
Right.
That's first. Once you get that, then you can get to the Glassdoor, then you can get to the LinkedIn, then you can get to the advertisements. But I would add one little twist, and I've had great support with our chief marketing officer, because I sat down and I said, because people power everything that we do, I appreciate that we're spending all of this marketing dollars on our consumer brand. But that consumer brand and the people that use cyber products are also the people that we're trying to attract to this company, that top talent.
That's right.
And so there needs to be some kind of set aside, there needs to be a focus on how we brand externally just from the people side of the equation. And the people, if you talent brand right, it's also helping your consumer brand at the same time. They're not that far off of one another.
That's right.
But get your culture right, get your values right, the principles of extreme ownership, if you're driving those through your company. When people go out in the marketplace, then before you, even if, in my case, I had no real branding dollars. So my first line of defense, or my first line of attack, as I would say, is teaching my talent consultants to be representatives of that brand by holding a very, very high standard in their screening. Start screening for those things, because anybody that comes in and you're just straight up with them, hey, these are the things we're looking for, and you start evaluating them based on those, they're going to go back out and they're going to say, well, okay, that was tough. It should be tough to get into your company.
That's right.
You want people to walk away. You don't want it to be a miserable experience, but tough is not miserable. Tough is a high bar, and people want to work for a place in a high bar. So start there, then move externally. Get your house in order, get your recruiting processes in order, your standards high, then go out into the market with whatever social media that you can afford and you think reaches your audience.
Well, George, the things you believe make organizations great are not that different than mine. Great leadership, great culture, great teamwork, and good solid values from the top down, and a great buy-in from everyone from the bottom up. I couldn't agree with you more on all of these points. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being part of this. Durable leaders, you guys, you have to get George and Mike's book, The Talent War. It is on Amazon for pre-order right now. The link will be in the description. But if you can't wait to get these golden nuggets, I recommend jumping on Jocko Willing's episode 244 podcast, and I will have that link in the description as well. George, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. I